What is up, everybody? This is your boy, Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Point. We are now down to just 4 teams in the NCAA Tournament. Which teams are still alive, and which teams are OUT out of here. We also recap the NIVC Tournament between South Dakota and Georgia Tech. Which team brought home the trophy, and which team fell short in the final. All that and more on Set Point. Welcome, everybody. Once again, this is another edition of Set Point with your boy, Teran Rodriguez. That would happen to be me. And do we have some amazing matchups to get into when it comes to the NCAA tournament? First, we're actually going to recap the NIVC tournament. Yes, I'm going to start things off a little bit weird, but, I'm weird like that. It's good to be weird a little. So last time we were here, it was the semifinals of the NIVC between South Dakota and Tulsa and Georgia Tech and TCU. And between those matchups, South Dakota took down Tulsa 3-1, advancing to the NIVC finals. South Dakota continued their amazing season with a 28-2 record as they would go on to face the winner of Georgia Tech and TCU. And that just so happened to be Georgia Tech, as Georgia Tech took down TCU in 4 sets, 3-1, advancing to the final of the NIVC tournament. I still have to give it up for TCU, though. TCU was just on one in this NIVC tournament. Some teams don't really care about the NIVC, but honestly, it's just a second chance for the postseason. For me, I don't really care on if it's the NIVC or the NCAA tournament. As long as you're getting some sort of postseason, you're getting extended volleyball, and as an athlete, it would be good. It's really good to have. So, as for the NIVC final, it was down to just 2 teams, South Dakota and Georgia Tech. The game was played at South Dakota, by the way. They don't really use neutral sites. They just use the home site of the highest remaining seed. And this one turned out to be quite the interesting matchup. South Dakota got off to a slow start against Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech came out swinging. I don't know if it was because Georgia Tech has been battle-tested, being in the Atlantic Coast Conference with teams like Pitt and Louisville. But, Georgia Tech, they were off to a fast start. They led 6-1 at one point in the first set, and they kept building on their lead. And they were up, I believe they were up like 22-17 at one point. And then just as Georgia Tech was getting to set point, back came South Dakota. They kept chipping away at the lead until it was like 24-23 when Georgia Tech managed to put down a kill to give Georgia Tech the first set, 25-23. It was kind of the same thing in the second set, except South Dakota was starting to battle back and to get into their own rhythm and lead against Georgia Tech. But then Georgia Tech pretty much took the lead back, and then they led in the late stages of the set. And then just like the first set, South Dakota pretty much was out there making a bit of a comeback, as they were trying to even up the match at 1-1, but Georgia Tech wasn't having that, as they put down another kill to give them set 2, 25-23, and a 2-0 lead in the match. And then pretty much Georgia Tech just came out hot in the third set, and they just had no intention of slowing down. I believe they didn't even trail once in that third set. They were up for the majority of that set, and it was like match point. South Dakota, to their credit, they tried to make a little bit of a comeback, but it just wasn't enough, as South Dakota would fall to the number 1 seed. The home team fell to Georgia Tech, as Georgia Tech won the NIVC in straight sets, break out the brooms, as Georgia Tech swept away South Dakota like a dirty floor, 3-0. And Georgia Tech is your NIVC champion. So let's hit the applause button for them real quick. And that's that for the NIVC. So big ups to Georgia Tech. It was a great year for them. I feel they really got snubbed in the NCAA tournament. Considering they finished second in the Atlantic Coast Conference behind Pitt, but they did happen to share second place with other teams like Florida State and Louisville. So it's kind of sad to see Georgia Tech get snubbed, but it is really cool to see them knocking off the number one seed of the tournament, being South Dakota. And South Dakota also had a great year too. I believe they were 28-3, and they had such a great run when it came to their regular season, and then they lost to Omaha in the conference semifinals, which Omaha eventually wound up losing to Denver, which wound up losing to Stanford, which is in the Final Four of the NCAA tournament. So there's that, and to close the book on the NIVC, I thought it was a great tournament. I think the NIVC is a great addition to the NCAA tournament. Many people say it's just 65th place and it's nothing to really care about, but honestly, for volleyball players and for seniors that are playing their last games as a college student athlete, they want as much volleyball as possible before they leave to go off professionally or do their own thing. So that's kind of my take, but it is what it is, and I was really happy to have covered an NIVC tournament for Long Beach State. It was a great match between them and Santa Clara, which wound up going 5 sets, which actually wound up going more than 15 points. So there was that. So overall, it was a great NIVC tournament. And, it really sucks that South Dakota also got snubbed from the NCAA tournament and they wound up falling short. But overall, they had a great season as well, because 28 wins is nothing to sneeze at. And they pretty much had one loss going into their conference tournament. So there's that, and maybe this fuels South Dakota for next year, as well as Georgia Tech, to possibly make the NCAA tournament for next year. And maybe they're putting the committee on notice, saying, "Hey, we're legit. We're a legit team. We don't need this NIVC. We want the real deal. We want the NCAA tournament." So, and also, I'm surprised a few teams maybe declined a potential invitation to the NIVC. I won't get into those teams, but to each his own. So overall, we have someone in the chat room, but there's Larry V. Good morning to you too, Larry V. Happy to see you here, Larry V. Great, thanks for checking in, buddy. Big shout out to Larry V. He's doing it big with his shows. So anyway, Now that we've got that out of the way, now that we got the NIVC out of the way, now let's get into the actual NCAA tournament. Oh yeah, now for the real deal, and last we left off, we were in the Elite Eight or the regional finals or whatever you kids like to call it. So the first matchup, we'll go from top to bottom, top left to bottom right. We'll start with Baylor and Washington. Now this was kind of the expected matchup. Baylor's just having such an amazing season. They're just on one. Baylor took down Washington in 4 sets. To the credit of Washington, they did have a big game. They obviously had a big game from Kara Bejema. Kara Bejema is just legit straight up legit. She's one of the best players in the Pac-12. I think definitely and debatably could have been the Pac-12 Player of the Year, but that's for another day. But Kara Benjamin had 20 kills and had a hitting percentage of 302. Washington also got a big game from Samantha Dreschel, who had 15 kills and hit 520 for the match. That's pretty impressive for her. So honestly, that's really good on her part. I said Kara Benjamin cannot carry Washington to victory by herself, especially against a really good team such as Baylor. But overall, it's great to see Dreschel stepping up. But that was pretty much it. Their next kill leader behind Dreschel was Claire Hoffman, who had 6 kills, and she kind of had a hitting percentage of 0, so that kind of offset those 6 kills with 6 hitting errors. So, Washington, it was kind of to be expected for Washington. They just don't have the Mustangs or the Huskies that Baylor does. As for Baylor, they were led by Yasonia Presley, who is arguably the best outside hitter of the NCAA, who had 24 kills. She only had 3 hitting errors as well, and she had a hitting percentage of 512. When you're hitting those numbers, you are straight up just balling out, and you are doing everything right. And your setter's also doing really good as well. So Shelly Stafford also stepped up with 11 kills on 15 swings and only 1 hitting error for a hitting percentage of 667. Very impressive also, because just like Washington, Yasonia Presley cannot carry Baylor all by herself. If Baylor's going to win this whole thing, they just cannot have Yasonia Presley carry the entire team. Volleyball is a team sport. It's not just one player carrying the team. It's got to be multiple players. So Shelly Stafford stepped up. Gia Milana also stepped up with 10 kills, and although she had 5 hitting errors, she did hit a solid 208, so not too bad. And this girl, Mariki Vandermark, had 9 kills and no hitting errors, and she had a hitting percentage of 562. So overall, Baylor really was just strong. That's the thing. This is definitely Baylor's best team by far, and they're proving it. They straight up. It wasn't the prettiest win. They could have swept Washington, but Washington being the resilient team and second place team from the Pac-12, because if you get second place in the Pac-12, you have a very good team. So overall, Washington, to their credit, fought as hard as they could, but Baylor was just too much for them. This is, like I said, this is Baylor's best team in forever, and Baylor's kind of like the Chicago Cubs of the NCAA women's volleyball. They're trying to get to. They have not been to the Final Four or the regional finals, and this is their first. This was their first ever look in the regional finals, and they made the most of it. So big ups to Baylor. They managed to take down Washington in 3 sets to 1, and they will go on to the NCAA semifinals, where they will face the winner of the Wisconsin-Nebraska matchup, which we will get into right now. So this Nebraska-Wisconsin matchup, I was a little surprised that Wisconsin swept Nebraska, but Wisconsin is just as good as Nebraska. But you also have to remember, these two teams are practically evenly matched, except Nebraska, they're a little young this year. They have 0 seniors on this team, so that kind of hurts them, and Wisconsin has some underclassmen as well, but Wisconsin just had every answer for Nebraska, and Wisconsin swept away Nebraska, and will move on to the NCAA semifinals for the 3rd time in team history. As for Nebraska, they were led by Lexi Sun and Jazz Sweet, who each had 11 kills. However, their hitting errors were kind of high. Lexi Sun had 10 hitting errors for only and she took 43 swings for only a hitting percentage of .23, which is very concerning. Your best player cannot have a bunch of hitting errors. It just cannot be that way. And Jazz Sweet also had 6 hitting errors for a hitting percentage of 167. Nebraska did not have any players with anything higher than a hitting percentage of 200, and that was Nicklin Hames, who only had one kill. So overall, it was a very, very, very ugly match for Nebraska. Wisconsin was just getting block after block, and Wisconsin's block was just making it so much tougher for Nebraska to maneuver their offense. Overall, it was just not Nebraska's day. And when you have no seniors on your team, and you're a very young team, and you're facing a conference rival who has gotten the better of you twice, it's tough. I get it. It's tough. But, in a stage like this where Nebraska has shined the most, I expected Nebraska to just put up a better fight. So, you can't, like I said, you can't have one player just carrying the load. I think Lexi Sun kind of had the pressure on her just because she's a really great leader and she's a very talented player. But, I think she was pressured to carry the team and that's why kind of the reason why she took so many swings. She took 43 swings, as well as Maddie Kubik, who took 30 swings and had 7 kills and 6 hitting errors for a hitting percentage of 33. That's when your team was not on its A game. When 2 of your best players had hitting percentages below 100, let alone below 50. So overall, it was just not really the best day for Nebraska. Now, as for Wisconsin, they were led by Molly Haggerty, who had 13 kills and only 3 hitting errors, for a solid hitting percentage of 250. And then Grace Loberg, not her best day. She had 9 kills, but she had 6 hitting errors. But, and for a hitting percentage of 100, not the best day, but still not bad, Then Dana Retke also had 7 kills. The hitting percentages weren't high, except for Danielle Hart, who had 4 kills and no hitting errors, but she only took 9 swings. So, but overall, it was just a better overall game for Wisconsin. You look at Tiffany Clark; she had 18 digs, and then in addition to that, Lauren Barnes had 9 digs, and then Emmy Dodge had 10 digs as well, and then Izzy Ashburn had 8 digs. So Wisconsin really dug the ball well, to their credit. As for Nebraska, they got 22 digs from Kenzie Knuckles, 12 digs from Maddie Kubik. They got 11 digs for Lexi Sun. It's quite impressive because Lexi Sun's been trying to improve her back row defense and her digging ability. So it's great to see her excelling when it comes to digging the ball, because digging the ball is quite important, and sometimes for taller players it can be tough. So, but overall, it was just a better game for Wisconsin. And strange but true, Wisconsin beat Nebraska 3 times this year, and in all 3 times they never dropped a set to the Cornhuskers. So that's very impressive by the Badgers, as they'll move on to the NCAA semifinals where they will face Baylor. And that's impressive because that's only Wisconsin's 3rd NCAA semifinal. They're also kind of like the Chicago Cubs, except we haven't really seen much of them in the NCAA semifinals or final. Each time they've been to the NCAA tournament semifinals, they wound up losing. I believe their last NCAA final appearance was in 2013, where they lost to Penn State, their fellow Big Ten rival, in 4 sets, and that was the second of a back-to-back for the Nittany Lions, and that was also Penn State's last NCAA championship. So. But, we'll see what happens with Wisconsin. Speaking of Penn State, they had the honor of facing number 3 Stanford. Number 11 Penn State took on number 3 Stanford, and Stanford walked away with a 3-set victory. The first set was very close. The first set was back and forth. Penn State looked like they were going to take the first set, and then Stanford just came out of nowhere, surprised them, and just took that first set, and basically just straight up took all the momentum from Penn State altogether, because after losing that first set, Penn State did not recover. Credit to Stanford, though. They have a lot of great seniors, and their leadership is just great. They got a lot of good contributions. Catherine Plummer, the reigning AVCA Player of the Year, had 24 kills and only 2 hitting errors for a hitting percentage of .512. Basically, those are Madden numbers right there. That's very impressive on her part. When you're hitting those numbers, you're basically going beast mode. And you have to give it up for her. It's just straight up impressive. And, Catherine Plummer hasn't been with Stanford all this time. She missed some time with the Cardinal. But overall, she returned and she's back to her dominant self. And in addition to the Catherine Plummer, Stanford also got some great contributions from Madeline Gates, who had 11 kills, no hitting errors, and 15 swings for a hitting percentage of .733. That's very impressive. Madeline Gates is definitely coming into her own at the middle blocker position, and she's definitely adapted well. And, despite only having 11 kills, that's a very impressive hitting percentage, and those are very impressive numbers by her. Also, Audrina Fitzmaurice was dominant in the middle blocker position with 9 kills and a hitting percentage of .368. So, overall, Audrina and Madeline Gates are the monsters in the middle, and they're doing a great job for Stanford. Another noteworthy performance was Holly Campbell, who had 8 kills, no hitting errors, and 11 swings for a hitting percentage of .727. Very impressive on her part. You really can't say anything bad about that. She's doing all she. She's not one of the top options in regards to that. In regards to Stanford's hitting options, but she's starting to come into her own, and. So overall, and then, Jenna Gray was Jenna Gray as she kept dishing out the assists on like ice cream on a hot summer day. So overall, it was just a strong performance from Stanford. And then Morgan Hentz had 14 digs. Megan McClure also had 12 digs as well, and she had 4 kills. She didn't take too many swings. She only took 7 swings, but, Megan McClure is one of those players where whenever you tell her to do something, she does it. She doesn't care about her numbers. She just does it, man. Whether it's digging the ball, blocking the ball, or getting kills, McClure just does it, And a big shout out to Megan McClure, who won the senior class award. Or she won some sort of award. I don't think it was the senior class award. That was Catherine Plummer that won the senior class award. But either way, Stanford just got the job done. As for Penn State, they were led by Tori Gorell, who had 13 kills. She had a very solid hitting percentage, only 1 hitting error and a hitting percentage of .667. Joni Parker had 10 kills, but she only hit .143 for the match. Serena Gray had 7 kills with no hitting errors. Solid outing by her. Kendall White only had 11 digs. That's kind of where Penn State struggled the most. They struggled digging the ball, considering Kendall White's dig count was low. But it's tough to stop a talented player like Megan McClure, Catherine Plummer, Audrina Fitzmaurice, and Madeline Gates. It's tough to stop a straight-up offensive powerhouse like Stanford. And you all need to remember that Stanford is the reigning champion. They're not going to give up the crown that easily. They've had a few bumps and bruises in the season, but nothing they can't handle. So overall, it was just a strong overall game by Stanford, and they're proving why they're the reigning NCAA champions. So Stanford will advance to the Final Four or the NCAA semifinals, where they will face the winner of the Minnesota-Louisville matchup, and we shall get into that last Elite Eight matchup, which is between Louisville, the Cinderella of the NCAA tournament, and Minnesota. Alright, so this was kind of to be expected, however. Minnesota swept away Louisville, which, Louisville's magic kind of came to an end. But you have to give credit to Louisville. Louisville made it all the way to the Elite Eight. I didn't have them going farther than the round of 32. I had them losing to Western Kentucky or Northern Kentucky. Either way, I didn't have Louisville going far. If I had to guess, I would have probably, if I had to redo my bracket, I probably would have had them going no farther than the Sweet 16. But to pull off that upset against Texas, that's very impressive on their part. Louisville was led by Iko Jones, who had 13 kills, only 4 hitting errors for a solid hitting percentage of .310, which is very impressive. But that was kind of where it stopped. Amber Stivrins had 8 kills, but she only had a hitting percentage of .115. So, and, it was only the Iko Jones show. Everyone else just had pretty bad hitting percentages. 2 of Louisville's players hit in the negative percentages, which is not good. And one of their players had 8 hitting errors and only 4 kills. I'm not going to mention her name because, I'm not about that life. But, most of Louisville's players are just did not have their best night. Iko Jones pretty much was the only player who was just strong for that team. And that's kind of a problem when you're playing a talented team such as Minnesota. For those of you that don't know, Minnesota finished tied for second in the Big Ten Conference with Penn State and Nebraska, and that was a dogfight of a conference. Whew. They finished behind Wisconsin. As for Minnesota's numbers, they were led by Adana Rollins, who had 12 kills and only 1 hitting error for a hitting percentage of .379. She also took 29 swings as well. Still very impressive numbers. Alexis Hart had 9 kills and a hitting percentage of .208, while Stephanie Samedi had 9 kills and a solid hitting percentage of .240. Taylor Morgan also had 5 kills. She kind of had a solid night. She only took 12 swings, but she had a hitting percentage of .417. So it's good that Minnesota has another option. And Reagan Pittman was very quiet. She only had 1 kill, but to each his own. I think Minnesota was trying to shy away from using Reagan and using some of their other options such as Alexis Hart, Adana Rollins, and Stephanie Samedi. But, Minnesota just got the job done. I didn't think Minnesota was going to win that strong. I thought this match was going to go 5, considering both of these teams had to go 5 in their Sweet 16 and round of 32 matchup. But, Minnesota, they are proving that last year's Sweet 16 blunder was a complete fluke. Because for those of you that don't know, last year Minnesota was the number 2 seed. They wound up losing were they the 2 seed? They were up there. They were like the 2 or 3 seed, and they wound up losing to Oregon in the round of 32, which that kind of took everyone by surprise. So overall, I'm glad Minnesota is proving the doubters wrong. I had Minnesota going no farther than the Elite 8, but, Texas kind of blundered in the Sweet 16. But it happens. The NCAA tournament is a whole different animal. The postseason is a whole different animal in general. If you're not playing your best, you can wind up on the plane back home, which is kind of sad, but, it is what it is. So Minnesota will advance to the semifinals or the Final Four, where they will face Stanford. So we do have to congratulate Louisville, Washington, Nebraska, and Penn State for amazing seasons. Sad to see their season come to an end, especially for some of the talented seniors that are on some of those teams. But your career is still bright, and you have nothing to be sad about, especially if you earned all regional honors. Now we have our Final Four between Baylor, Wisconsin, Stanford, and Minnesota. So congratulations to those 4 teams as they will be advancing to the Final Four, which will be played tonight. So round of applause for Stanford, Baylor, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. All right, so we are 30 minutes into this thing, and we are now about to get into the Elite the Final Four matches, or the NCAA semifinals. Let's get ill with that pill, starting with Baylor and Wisconsin. So we have some big... So in regards to Baylor, here's something you need to know about Baylor. They're 29-1. They're co-Big 12 champions with sharing the title with Texas. Their only loss was at Texas, where they just played a horrible game. But it is tough to beat Texas at Texas because, the Longhorns are very good at their place. It's tough to win at University of Texas, unless you're Louisville, of course, which of course you managed to pull an upset. And believe it or not, Baylor is only the third team from the Big 12 to go to the Final Four. The other two were Texas, which is obviously a perennial powerhouse, and Kansas. The Big 12 has a good conference, but it's not as big as like the SEC, the Pac-12, or the Big Ten. It's kind of up there in terms of Power 5 conferences, but it's not really. It's kind of like on the bubble. Now, as for the players to watch out for on Baylor, you obviously have Yasonia Presley, who has 521 kills and 200 hitting percentage of 281. But it's not just the Yasonia Presley show. It is Shelly Stafford, middle blocker Shelly Stafford, who has 257 kills for a hitting percentage of 358. And keep in mind, Yasonia Presley is only a junior outside hitter. She is going to be back next year. So Baylor is going to be here next year, as going to be doing big things as well. Senior outside hitter Gia Milana has 234 kills. And then someone who's playing well as of late is redshirt sophomore opposite hitter Mariki Vandermark, who has 185 kills, but a hitting percentage of 344. She came up big in Baylor's match against Purdue. And, Purdue's not really the easiest team to beat, especially when they come from a very tough conference being the Big Ten. Like I said, that conference was a dogfight for the most part. As for dig leaders, senior libero Tara Wolf has been leading the pack with 340. See what I did there? Get it? Wolf pack. Anyway, and also Brea Hunt, a senior defensive specialist, is up there in digs. She's not too far from Tara Wolf in regards to digs. She has 324 digs. Yasonia Presley has 229 digs, which is impressive for her. And then Hannah Locken, the setter, she can just do it all. She's got 1,148 assists, 276 digs, and 89 kills. So this Baylor team is very hungry. They're young. And the scary thing about them is that their underclassmen are stepping up. And, you can't really fault that. Baylor is just on something new. They are playing great, and I think that loss to Texas kind of woke them up because, it's tough to lose to a conference rival, and, especially when you're on the road. You're on the road, you're intimidated by quite a bit of fans, and overall, it's tough. And then when you lose a game like that, you wind up having to win. Your next matchup between your rival is a must-win, where if you lose that, you're basically not going to be conference champions. But Baylor was able to take down Texas the second time on its home floor. Believe it or not, that win over Texas was the first one since October of 2001. So Baylor was long yearning for a win over Texas, and they got it. And that win over Texas helped them salvage a share of the Big 12 conference title, and it eventually helped Baylor get the number 1 overall seed. And, this Baylor team, they're hungry. They want to be in the NCAA final. But in order to get to the NCAA final, they have to get past another aspiring team that wants to make the NCAA final. That being the Wisconsin Badgers. So believe it or not, Wisconsin was actually 4-4 to start the season, and then they reeled off quite a bit of wins. They won, I believe it was like almost, I think it was like 15 in a row, until they lost that one game to Ohio State, which, Big Ten, when it comes to the Big Ten, anything can happen. Wisconsin was heavily favored in that match, and then Ohio State just brought out the balloon poppers and said, you know what? They popped the balloons of Wisconsin and said, you know what? We're gonna spoil your little winning streak, and we might spoil your chances of winning the Big Ten. So, and then Wisconsin had a dramatic ending to the end of Big Ten conference play. They lost to Penn State after they were up 2-0, and then they needed Penn State to lose to Minnesota in order to win the Big Ten outright. And that's actually what happened. So Wisconsin won the Big Ten conference, and believe it or not, Wisconsin has not dropped a set this postseason. So Wisconsin has yet to lose a set in the postseason, which is very impressive. Not a whole lot of teams can live to tell the tale in regards to that. So, and this is only their third overall appearance in the Final Four, and they're still in search of that NCAA championship. They're trying to exorcise their demons when it comes to the NCAA final, but in order to get to the final, they have to get past Baylor. But this team has the players to do so. They are led by junior middle blocker Dana Redke, who has 387 kills and a hitting percentage of .401. That's very impressive. Very impressive for a middle. Middles obviously will hit the higher percentage, considering they're the tallest one on the team, and they're just spiking the ball straight down. If you're a libero, you got to be ready for that, because they can hit it anywhere, anytime, any place, any way. So Dana Redke's really been impressive for the Badgers this year. Another player who's just as impressive is Molly Haggerty, a redshirt junior who has 836 kills. She's right behind Dana Redke. So Molly Haggerty and Redke are the two-headed monster. Her hitting percentage is .261, which is solid. Also, Grace Loberg is up there in kills. She has 343 kills and a hitting percentage of .267, also pretty good. And then Danielle Hart, a redshirt sophomore, is up there in kills with 194 kills, 316 hitting percentage. So overall, in terms of the kill department, Wisconsin is good, man. They have so many underclassmen in regards to kills, to their kill leaders. It's scary to see what this team's going to be in the upcoming years. And as for digs, Tiffany Clark continues her stellar season with 419 digs. Lauren Barnes is a junior libero / defensive specialist, has 280 digs, and then freshman setter Izzy Ashburn has 242 digs as well. And then Sydney Hilly is up there with 223 digs, and she leads the team in assists with 1,328 assists. So overall, this Wisconsin team is also hungry. I was very impressed to see them shake off those. Keep in mind, this team actually lost to Minnesota not once but twice in the span of 3 days. So it was very surprising to see Wisconsin just straight up turning the ship around after losing those two matchups. So overall, Wisconsin is definitely lived up to their hype. When you win the Big Ten Conference, you have a lot of expectations. And some teams crumble in those pressurized situations. But, for Wisconsin, they're playing on another level, man. Especially when they have such a young team. They're only seniors that are in regards to their leaders in certain stats are Clark and just Clark, who's a senior libero. So overall, this Wisconsin team is getting it done, and they want to win the NCAA tournament. They want to bring home a title back to Wisconsin. And between Baylor and Wisconsin, neither of them have won the NCAA tournament. And between Baylor, they have not even sniffed the NCAA final. They have not, like I said, they haven't gotten far in regards to the NCAA tournament. And, like last week was their first regional final or Elite Eight, and this is going to be their first NCAA semifinal in team history. And, as for Wisconsin, like I said, they want to get to the promised land, which is the NCAA tournament. So overall, Wisconsin and Baylor, that should be a great matchup. Believe it or not, Baylor actually took down Wisconsin the first time around. So I'm a firm believer in teams that have beaten other teams the first time around and giving them the edge. However, it's tough to say when it comes to Wisconsin. Wisconsin is strong, man. To not even drop a set at this point of the tournament is very impressive. And, to sweep a team, a conference rival 3 times in one season, that's also impressive. So overall, this Wisconsin team looks strong, and this Baylor team also looks strong. However, I'm a firm believer of the Big Ten coming up big and being more battle-tested than any other conference, except for maybe like the Pac-12 or the SEC. But overall, I'm going to go with Wisconsin for this one. I'm picking Wisconsin in the upset over Baylor. It sounds silly, I know, but I'm picking Wisconsin over Baylor, But now, I'm probably guaranteeing a Baylor win. But overall, I'm taking Wisconsin the upset. I say Wisconsin wins in 4 sets, but all those sets are going to be tight, especially that 4th set. I think once Wisconsin has Baylor against the wall, Baylor is going to fight like heck, and they're also going to pull out all the stops, especially Sonia Presley. But I think Wisconsin, being the talented team that they are, and battle-tested in the Big Ten with facing teams like Nebraska, Penn State, Minnesota, Purdue, Michigan, all those teams, that team is strong, man. I cannot go wrong with the Big Ten. So I think Wisconsin gets their revenge, and I think Wisconsin's going to be in the promised land when it comes to the NCAA final. So I'm going Wisconsin over Baylor. Sorry, Baylor fans. But, I will be eating a lot of crap if Baylor somehow manages to prove me wrong and sweep away Wisconsin. But if it goes 5, I won't feel too bad, because Baylor's also good. This is Baylor's best team of all time. This is, if there's a Baylor team that's going to prove themselves as a national champion, this is the Baylor team. This is the Baylor women's volleyball team that wants to prove themselves as champions. So that's going to be a really good matchup. 1 versus 4, on paper it would go to Baylor, but I got to give the edge to Wisconsin, considering, they're battle tested, and, they faced adversity early on in the season, and I think that's kind of what gives them the edge. So I'm going with Wisconsin over Baylor. Now for the other matchup between another familiar foe, a familiar 2 foes, between Stanford and Minnesota, the Pac-12 versus the Big Ten. So like I said earlier, Stanford is the reigning NCAA champion. I forgot to mention Wisconsin's record. Wisconsin has an overall record of 26 and 6. So like I said, they start off 4-4, but they turned it around. They basically won 22 of their last 24 games, which is very impressive. So there's that. Now let's get into Minnesota and Stanford. Starting with Stanford, Stanford is the reigning NCAA champion. That's pretty much all you need to know. No, I'm just kidding. So, yeah, I thought I had you, didn't I? Anyway, Stanford, reigning NCAA champion. They also won the Pac-12. They didn't do it as cleanly as I thought they would. Many people thought that Stanford was going to pretty much blow everyone away in the Pac-12. Pac-12 didn't really have a clear-cut winner. Then that loss to Washington happened. Washington and Stanford only met once this year, but Stanford lost that match in the Maples Pavilion in 4 sets. But consider this. They did not have Catherine Plummer in that match. So that was kind of an unfortunate situation for Stanford. In addition to losing to Washington, Stanford also did not have Catherine Plummer for their matchup against UCLA, which, they lost at Pauley Pavilion in straight sets. And that was the first time UCLA lost in straight sets since, I believe, 2015. It was very rare to see. So very rare to see in regards to that. But, that loss eventually galvanized and in addition to that, Stanford almost lost to USC, which would have also been detrimental. But, they managed to rally back and beat USC in a reverse sweep. So I think that was kind of the turning point right there. They obviously didn't miss Catherine Plummer, but, they had other players to step up like Kendall Kipp, Megan McClure, Audrina Fitzmaurice, Madeline Gates, Holly Campbell. So overall, the Stanford team has risen above adversity to deliver such a great overall and potential encore performance. The Cardinal is led by Catherine Plummer. No surprise there. She has a hit with 396 kills and a 323 hitting percentage. Audrina Fitzmaurice isn't too far back. She has 321 kills and a hitting percentage of 312. Madeline Gates, a transfer from UCLA. Oh, we have someone in the chat room. Oh, it's Larry B again. He said, it would have been great to see USC win, but Stanford was the better team. Yeah, unfortunately, Stanford was, especially with all the seniors they got. They have their bases loaded in regards to most of their positions this year, such as Jenna Gray at setter, Morgan Hens at libero. Their outside hitters and opposites with players like McClure and Plummer, and then their middle blocker, their two-headed middle blocker monster being Audrina Fitzmaurice and Madeline Gates, man, And it seems like whenever Stanford has someone go down, they have other players to take over. So, I remember when Kendall Kipp had to step up when Catherine Plummer was out, and then eventually Kendall Kipp also got injured as well. She, I believe, hurt her knee, and then they had to have another outside hitter step up, and that was Natalie Birdie, who, if some modern day people know, that was the reigning Gatorade State Player of the Year in California. So no matter what happens to Stanford, they always have a player to step up when in regards to their. Larry B is asking, what high school did Plummer go to? Did she attend? The more I listen to the show, I can see that Southern California is a volleyball hotbed. Yes, like softball. So yeah, Larry B is wondering. Larry B, big shout out to you for tuning into the show. So Larry B is wondering where Catherine Plummer went. Catherine Plummer went to high school at Elisa Niguel in Aliso Viejo. Elisa Niguel has been a dominant girls volleyball high school program for quite some time. Honestly, and she helped the Wolverines win a CIF championship back in 2014. It was very impressive on her part because, and she also teamed up with Lindsay Ruddins, who played for UCSB for 4 seasons. She also had a redshirt season her first year, but, that was because of injuries. Overall, Larry is right. Southern California is a hotbed for volleyball. And, and that also goes for, he says, makes sense, another Southern California product. And it's not just Catherine Plummer who is dominant. You also have Kendall Kipp, who went to Corona Del Mar, who she's only a freshman, and she was one of the more overlooked players, but, I'm glad she got an All-American honor. And then Natalie Birdie, who hasn't really seen much action this year, she came from Mater Dei. Megan McClure came from Santa Margarita. So overall, Stanford, they're picking players like apples on a tree. So overall, those are pretty much those players, Larry is right for the most part. Volleyball is pretty much a hotbed for girls volleyball. It also can be for boys volleyball as well. But enough about that. As for back to Stanford, Madeline Gates, a senior middle blocker transfer from UCLA. She has 252 kills and 330. She has a hitting percentage of 332. Very impressive by her. I'm glad she's sharing the middle blocker position with Audrina Fitzmaurice quite well. So there's that. And Kendall Kipp, she hasn't really played a whole lot. She saw some time at the beginning, and then she got injured, and then, she's and now she's back on the bench. I don't know what's going on in regards to that, but it doesn't matter. She's actually been quite impressive. She had 166 kills and a hitting percentage of .223. That's solid numbers. For a freshman, that's pretty solid. And once she's if fully healthy, I would go all the way and say that Kendall Kipp definitely would have been the AVCA Freshman of the Year. It sucks that she didn't win the award, but stuff happens. It happens. And I think that not winning the Freshman of the Year is going to humble Kendall Kipp to potentially working on her game. Oh, and Larry B is going to have his finals prediction. So I actually I'm kind of going on Stanford a little too much. So. And then in regards to Kendall Kipp, yeah. And in addition to Kendall Kipp, Holly Campbell, a sophomore middle blocker. I have her down as a freshman, but sophomore middle blocker, she's done great things as well. It's kind of impressive to see middle blockers, just 3 middle blockers used at once. Honestly, it's pretty impressive if you ask me. Because it's tough to utilize 2 middle blockers, but to utilize 3, that's pretty solid. So Stanford has a lot of their bases loaded. And Jenna Gray is also up there in kills. She has 107 kills, but, you can't really say that in regards to a setter. A setter, honestly, does not get kills a whole lot. So in regards to their assists, Jenna Gray is their assist leader with 1,315 assists, and she has 227 digs. Morgan Hentz leads Stanford in digs with 563 digs. McClure is up there in digs with 305. I'm certain she is drastically improving her back row defense. And, her being an outside hitter, it's quite natural, but overall, she is just definitely come into her own at Stanford. So, honestly, I'm very impressed with McClure. She doesn't have the kills like Plummer does, but she does things well outside of killing the ball. She digs the ball really well. And Kate Formico has 250 digs, and then Catherine Plummer has 144 digs. So that's pretty much Stanford in a nutshell. They've just been dominant all over the place, so I'm quite impressed. Now let's get into Minnesota. So believe it or not, Minnesota. Oh, by the way, Stanford is currently 28-4, so it's quite impressive that Stanford, despite the adversity, I think, I thought Stanford was going to have an easy time, especially taking down teams like Texas, but then losses to Minnesota, which, is their opponent now, and BYU kind of hurt them, but overall, it's great to, and, they also had to go 5 with Utah, not just in the NCAA tournament, but in Pac-12 play as well. So Stanford, pretty much doing all they can to possibly keep their repeat title hopes alive. By the way, Stanford has the most NCAA championships in regards to women's volleyball. They have 8 championships, which is just above Penn State. So they're kind of like Stanford to me is kind of like the New England Patriots of NCAA women's volleyball, and I kind of have Penn State like the Pittsburgh Steelers. Different divisions or different conferences, but pretty much in the same boat, and in regards to Power 5 conferences. So that's pretty much Stanford. Now to Minnesota. Minnesota started the season 1-2, but including that unpredictable straight set loss to Florida State. But then they finished 27-5, which included a win over Stanford, a 3-1 win over Stanford, which in the Big 10 Pac-12 crossover. So Minnesota, like I said, finished in a 3-way tie for first place, or for second place in the Big 10 conference, because that, like I said, that conference was a dogfight. They finished tied for second with Penn State and Nebraska. And when you're finishing that high in the Big Ten, it's impressive. You can't say it. That's a Power 5 conference right there. So overall, they're just strong, man. Minnesota is strong, and like I said, Minnesota is proving that last year's Sweet 16 loss was a complete fluke, and that anything can happen. So, in regards to their kill leaders, Stephanie Semeti leads a junior opposite leads the Golden Gophers in kills with 340 kills and 236 with a hitting percentage of 236. Reagan Pittman, she's up there in terms of kills with 252 kills. She's got a good hitting percentage of 356, which is quite impressive. Alexis Hart has 338 kills and a hitting percentage of 268, which is also impressive. Adana Rollins has 302 kills and a hitting percentage of 231. Redshirt senior middle blocker Taylor Morgan has 213 kills and a hitting percentage of 356. So that's pretty impressive as well. Also very impressive, the only difference is that, mostly Minnesota's kills are coming from seniors. Alexis Hart is a senior, as well as redshirt senior Taylor Morgan. Hart is right behind Semeti in terms of kills. So overall, I think that's pretty impressive. It's very impressive. Believe it or not, there's defensively, their libero / defensive specialist is a sophomore and a freshman. Cece McGraw, who is a sophomore libero, leads Minnesota in digs with 474 digs, and then freshman libero Rachel Kilkelly has 260 digs. And in regards to assists, Minnesota runs a 6-2 offense. 6-2 means you're running two setters either on the same court or you're rotating between setters. So Larry over here is saying, so Minnesota will be losing a lot of seniors. Will they make this deep of a run next season? Good question, Larry. I think Minnesota can make a deep run next year. Honestly, I think Minnesota is the team that's always perennially good. And they still have a lot of good players on their team. But I think they'll be making a deep run next year with players like Stephanie Semeti, Reagan Pittman, Adana Rollins, who's only a sophomore, and then their defense will be staying put. And then Kylie Miller leads Minnesota in assists with 662 assists, while they have a sophomore, Bailey McMenamin, who has 491 assists. So I think Minnesota overall will still be good in regards to next year. They still have a lot of good players offensively, and they will be keeping their defensive front in regards to their dig leaders, as well as Bailey McMenamin. It's just that Minnesota's going to have to transition from 6-2 to 5-1, which basically you'll be running just one setter and then five players just on the court doing whatever. So overall, as for Minnesota and Stanford, this is like I said, I'm a firm believer of teams having the edge over a team whenever they beat them. But consider this. Stanford has been very humbled in regards to those losses. They knew that this was repeating as champions wasn't going to be easy. They knew they had a huge target on their back. They knew they had a lot of pressure on them. So to me, I definitely think Stanford is going to beat Minnesota the second time. I'm going to say Stanford beats Minnesota 3-1, considering, they obviously want revenge. But, it's not about getting revenge. It's about playing for your fans, and you just want to prove to yourself that you can repeat as champions. And this is the team that Stanford's going to do it, because Stanford always reloads instead of rebuilds, but with players like Jenna Gray, who is a senior setter, Morgan Hentz, who is a freshman or a senior libero, and Catherine Plummer, who is a senior opposite, those three players want to leave their mark, and they want to say, hey, we repeated as NCAA champions. And believe it or not, Hentz, Gray, and Plummer have been playing starting on Stanford since their freshman year. It's quite crazy, honestly. Jenna Gray had to swap out took the, as a freshman, took the starting setter position from a senior back in Jenna Gray's freshman year at Stanford. And the same can be said for Morgan Hentz. And then Catherine Plummer was pretty much on the rise from the get-go, and she even was named the National Freshman of the Year. So overall, to me, Stanford is just a well-oiled machine, and I just think they are just strong. They're strong, man, and they've been battle-tested, and they've been battle-tested in the Pac-12, facing teams like UCLA, USC, Washington, Utah. Utah is definitely prepared them for this moment, and I could see them going to war quite a bit. So overall, I think Stanford is definitely the better team by far. Nothing against Minnesota, but Stanford isn't the reigning champion for nothing. And then Minnesota also had to go 5 in their round of 32 and round of 16 matchup. They had to go 5 with Creighton. They had to go 5 with Florida. Granted, those two teams are really good, and that those two teams are co-conference champions. And one was the co-conference champion, and one was the regular season champion. But Minnesota is proving that you don't have to be first place. You don't have to get first place in order to have a deep playoff run. This kind of also, me picking Stanford also kind of contradicts what I said about the Big Ten. But to me, the Pac-12 is also the same deal. The Pac-12 is always a dogfight night in and night out. If you're not playing your best volleyball in the Pac-12, you can wind up taking an L. Stanford realized that when they played Washington, even at Maples Pavilion. They also realized that when they played UCLA, who was one of the more improved teams, and which has the Pac-12 Player of the Year being Mac May. So to me, I definitely gotta go with Stanford winning in 4 sets. I wouldn't be surprised if Minnesota made it a battle, but I would be a little surprised to see Minnesota upsetting Stanford, just because Minnesota is also kind of like the Chicago Cubs of the NCAA women's volleyball. They've been to the Final Four 5 times. They've only made the final once, and that one time was when they lost to Stanford in 4 sets, which was back in 2015 when Jenna Gray and Catherine Plummer and Morgan Hentz and a bunch of those now seniors were then freshmen. So, Minnesota, they definitely want to prove themselves as NCAA champions, and it would be great to see Minnesota making it all the way to the NCAA final, but they got to go through Stanford, and Stanford they just look so strong, man. They're just strong. So I'm going with Stanford over Minnesota, and I'm also picking Wisconsin over Baylor. And Larry B tuning into the show. Big ups to Larry B. Here's his finals predictions. He's got Baylor beating Wisconsin in 5 sets. Baylor winning 3-2 over Wisconsin. That sounds quite right. I think, Baylor is definitely a good team. They're not to be slept on. And 29-1 is nothing to sneeze at, honestly. I definitely think that they can beat Wisconsin, but I just think Wisconsin's just a little more battle tested, especially they played such a strong non-league schedule or non-conference schedule. Then they had their big non-conference games, and I think their losses are kind of what's going to humble and fuel Wisconsin to victory, whereas Baylor hasn't had much adversity. Their only adversity was losing to Texas in straight sets, which it was definitely to be expected, especially since Baylor Texas is also on the level of Baylor, but Baylor this year is definitely one of the more talented teams. So that's kind of my take, but I respect that prediction. Baylor beating Wisconsin in 5 sets. I can definitely see that going 5, considering Baylor is strong, but they're also young. The same can be said for Wisconsin, but Wisconsin, they've had this thing on their chest where this like little curse saying, you have yet to win an NCAA championship. You've hardly been to the Final Four. It's been so long since you've actually been relevant. Well, Wisconsin is kind of shaking off that irrelevant label. So, that's kind of the reason why I chose Wisconsin. But Baylor is also up there. Baylor wants to prove themselves as champions, and they have not sniffed. Like I said, they haven't sniffed the Final Four until this year, and they have yet to sniff an NCAA championship match or an NCAA championship. So overall, I still like my pick between Wisconsin over Baylor. I need to pick a big time upset. I did pick Hawaii to try to topple Nebraska, but I was very surprised to see Nebraska not having too many problems with Hawaii. So this is kind of my big time upset here. And then Larry also says Stanford takes down Minnesota in 4 sets. That's about right. I think Stanford they'll either win the first set or they'll win the first set, then Minnesota wins the second set. Then losing that second set fuels Stanford to just go off, and especially Catherine Plummer. She is a baller, man. She puts up what Larry and I call Madden numbers. So Stanford is definitely going to try to repeat as champions. And then Minnesota also, they're good, but they're not on Stanford's level. Stanford is playing on a high level, and Stanford is going to lose a lot of seniors. So we'll see what happens in regards to Stanford and Minnesota. And then Larry also says that Stanford and Baylor will meet in the final, and then Stanford wins in 5 sets, with the 5th set being 18-16. That sounds about right. If Baylor and Stanford do meet in the final, I see that one going 5, and I see the 5th set going 18-16, somewhere past 15 points. Overall, I think that sounds about right. Baylor has a bunch of offensive firepower, but Stanford to me has just a lot more in the tank. They have all their bases covered in regards to defense, offense, and serve receive. So, I just think that they're just strong. I think Stanford overall is just a strong program, and like I said, they're the team that reloads instead of rebuilds, and they've been through they've been through a head coach already after they I believe it was in 2017 when 2017 Kevin Hambly came over to Stanford, and then they didn't wind up winning. I think they wound up losing in the semifinals, and then 2018, Stanford won their first title under Kevin Hambly. So overall, Stanford is out to prove that they want to repeat as champs. So we'll see what happens though. Tonight those matchups will start, which the first matchup between Baylor and Wisconsin will start at 4 p.m. Pacific time. It'll be featured on ESPN, which is really cool. I'm so happy it gets to be featured on ESPN. It's going to be played in Pittsburgh, which, if Pitt had made the semifinals, they would have gotten a home semifinal game, which, it's disappointing to see what happened to Pitt, but I will be getting into that a little later sometime in the future. And then Stanford and Minnesota, number 7 seed Minnesota faces number 3 seed Stanford. Will follow the Baylor-Wisconsin match. That will also be on ESPN. It'll be aired at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time, and then 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. And once again, it'll be featured on ESPN, so it's going to be on national television. So That's really cool that the sport of volleyball continues to grow, and I'm definitely looking forward to both matchups. I'm hopefully going to be able to catch both those matchups, but we'll see. But overall, that's going to do it for this show in regards to Set Point. It's great to be back after a little while. You can find me on Twitter at Teran Rodriguez 1. Teran is my first name, Teran, and then Rodriguez is spelled Rodriguez, and then the number 1. Once again, that is at Teran Rodriguez 1. Eventually, I will plug in my Twitter name in the description, but we'll see. But until then, as my boy Larry B would say, cue the music, 'cause we are out of here! Once again, this is your boy, Teran Rodriguez, bidding you a fond farewell for today. You'll actually be back here tomorrow breaking down what happened in the NCAA semifinals, and we will be discussing which teams are still alive in the NCAA tournament. There can only be 2 teams in the NCAA final. Who will it be? You can only find out on Set Point, and tonight on ESPN. But until then, have a great rest of the day, and go enjoy some volleyball.